Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience driving a C8 Corvette as my everyday car. We're going to talk a little bit about what options I think make it useful as an everyday car. We're going to talk about my experiences with driving it, and we're going to talk about a couple of the things that were surprises on the car, either positive or negative. I kind of got the idea for this video from a little trip we took out to Canmore this fall, which is a little mountain resort town west of Calgary. We parked the car on the street, and as I was paying for parking, a guy comes along and starts asking me all kinds of questions. He was thinking about buying one of these cars, and he wanted to know what my experience was with it and what options I thought were worthwhile. So let's talk about the particular car that I have and how it's optioned. It's a 2024 C8 Stingray 2LT hardtop convertible with the Z51 and the nose lift package. So it's also got some optional wheels, black painted mirrors and spoiler. It's got the carbon fiber accent package inside. It's got the weather mats and so on. Little options like that. The paint color is a personal choice. This red mist paint that's on this car looks like liquid when it's in the bright sun. I really like it, and it's exactly the color of paint that I like, so I couldn't be happier with that. The first question is this car something you can drive as a daily? Well, I have been driving it as a daily. I got the car in April. I put almost 7,500 miles on it. It's been my drive around, going to work, everyday car. I've been on a couple of road trips with it, some just fun cruises. My wife and I went on a little cruise to Alaska. We drove the car out to Vancouver to catch up with the ship, drove it back. Of course, you've got to carry around 10 days worth of luggage in order to do that. I've given the car a pretty good tryout as a all-around, everyday summer car. Now, I've seen the odd crazy guy drive one of these in a Saskatchewan winter. I don't think I would recommend that. It's more of a stunt than it is a good idea. But for a summer car, it has worked out just fine as an everyday car. You might ask yourself, why don't I just buy a 1LT with no options? Isn't that just as good of an everyday car? Well, I would say it isn't. Here are a couple of reasons. First and foremost, I bought the car as a hardtop convertible. Now, Alberta is about the most sunny place in Canada, but you can practically count on a day that's a beautiful sunny day, having 30 minutes of torrential rain, and then it'll be a sunny day again. So you have got to leave your car with the top up. This is a real pain if you're using a Targa Top Corvette where it's manually removed, or if you're using any kind of a convertible where you have to put the top up manually. I've always driven a convertible Mustang. They have a power top, and you need it. Now you might say, oh, I live in a place where it's sunny all the time, where the weather's really predictable. Okay, great. But let me tell you something else about the convertible hardtop. When the hardtop retracts, it retracts over the engine. So it uses 0 of your storage capacity. Now, this is a car that's not exactly made of storage capacity, but if you're planning to, drive the car as your all-the-time car, and you want to do things like go on a little trip like my wife and I did with it, where you have to carry some luggage, the last thing in the world that you need is something eating into your cargo capacity. Well, if you have the Targa Top, the place you stow the Targa Top is in the trunk. So you've practically lost your entire trunk to take the Targa Top out. So if you go on a sunny driving trip like we did, where you would want to have the top out, you're not going to because you don't have any room for your luggage. The car I have is a 2LT. These Corvettes come in 3 trim levels: 1LT, 2LT, and 3LT. 1LT is the lowest trim level. It is the most basic car. It also costs the least. 2LT basically includes or enables all of the useful options on these cars. And the main difference between 2 and 3LT is extra customization. So you get a 3LT, you can get some goofy seat belt colors and some goofy seat colors and some goofy exterior colors and so on. The Corvette may be one of the most factory customizable cars out there, but to get all of that crazy customization, you're going to need a 3LT. If you just want a car that you can drive around and use as your everyday car, 2LT is where it's at. So what do you get with the 2LT that you don't with the 1LT? Let me give you a little rundown here. 14 speaker stereo instead of I think 10. You get the memory seats and memory steering wheel. You get cross traffic and blind zone sensors, although honestly I thought even the 1LT had blind zone sensors, or maybe they have them as an option. And believe me, you better get blind zone sensors if you have this car. You get the performance data recorder, which you can think of this as a little dash cam, but it also allows you to place performance data from the car as an overlay on the camera display. I like having a dash cam. I normally put them in my cars. This is a great integrated little system. Records to a SD card, which you can take out and download onto a computer. That's really a nice little option. Get a heated steering wheel. I know, what's the point of a heated steering wheel in a Corvette? Well, I'm driving it in the fall here. It's end of October when I'm recording this. And believe me, on a cool day where it's right around freezing when you fire the car up, that heated wheel is actually really nice. Wireless phone charger. I mean, I can scarcely believe that the 1LT doesn't have a wireless phone charger, but according to GM, it doesn't. That's something you pretty well gotta have these days. Heads-up display. The heads-up display is really nice. Again, I'm a little surprised you don't get that on the 1LT, but it just goes to show how stripped down the 1LT really is. Folding mirrors. Apparently the mirrors, which you can set up to fold in when you lock the car, are not on a 1LT by default. You get your front cameras, and it's got curb cameras. They're really useful for sure. And the garage door opener. Apparently the garage door opener is not included with a 1LT. Well, I'm guessing that most of you guys who are going to buy a C8 Corvette have a garage that you need a garage door opener for. So that's kind of a bad omission on the bare bones car. Like I said, with 2LT, you get pretty well all the nice to have options. Most of these things are conveniency options, but let's face it, you spend a lot of bottle return money to get a C8 Corvette, so why get one that isn't nicely optioned? You're going to enjoy a 2LT a lot more. I got the Z51 package on this car. Is that something that you need for an everyday car? No, not really, but I actually think it's one of the best value packages that you can get on the Corvette. You're going to get the performance suspension, you get the electronic limited slip differential, 517 final drive, you get the better Brembo brakes all the way around, you get the performance exhaust, which, I mean, they claim it adds 5 horsepower. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, but it does have little doors that open up, so you can get the car to sound a lot cooler with that performance exhaust. It's a pretty neat little option. You get the Z51 spoiler, and frankly, I think the car looks way better with the Z51 spoiler. I see guys say, oh, they're terrible, ugly cars in the back, and I'm not a big fan of them when they're smooth in the back, like no spoiler, but with this Z51 spoiler, it's not over the top, and I think it finishes off the back really nicely. You get heavy duty cooling, and let me tell you something, this car runs cool. I drove it pretty hard through the mountains, up and down, stinking hot days, and it just stayed cool. You never have to worry about it. And you get the Pilot Sport 4S's for tires. There's also a special brake cooling kit. It's extra ducting. That kit doesn't actually come installed on the car. You're only supposed to put it on for the track, and apparently it can scoop up road debris and feed it into your brakes if you run around with it all the time. So you know, that's not going to be an everyday car option, but if you are going to take the car to the track, sure is nice to have the Z51 option. And for the price difference, I think it's actually a great value. The other option that makes a real difference is the nose lift. Now, I have to say the C8 has better ground clearance than the last 2 generations of Corvette. I have special ramps here in the shop for getting Corvettes onto the dyno. Some of these cars are unbelievably low, and you know, if you're going to drive the car every day, I don't care where you are, you're going to face protruding manhole covers and road hazards and steep driveways and speed bumps and so on. If the car's too low, you're never going to use it as an everyday car. What that nose lift does is it brings your nose up another inch or so, inch and a half, something like that, and gives you just that much more clearance for a steep driveway. I've measured it and it's actually better than my stock ride height 2011 GT Mustang is. The nose lift is operated with a real convenient manual button that you can push. It's always there. It's not a part of the electronic display. You don't have to fiddle around with a bunch of settings on a screen to get to it. There's just a button that you push. On top of that is a GPS memory. So when you select nose lift, a little message comes up and says, do you want to save this spot? You press yes, and it will remember that spot. And as long as when you approach that spot, you're doing under 22 miles an hour, I think it is, it'll automatically lift the nose. That way, when you come home to your steep driveway from a long, tired day at work, you don't have to remember to hit the button. It automatically does it for you. This is a great option to have. I would strongly recommend that you get it. And it's another reason to get a 2LT because the nose lift isn't even available on 1LT cars. I've driven as a daily. I've driven it all over the place, and I don't think I've ever touched the front end. It's just fantastic. Okay, well, what about my experience driving it? I'm sure a lot of you guys know I've driven Mustangs my whole adult life. Driven a lot of wild Mustangs, and this Corvette is only 495 horsepower claimed. Is it really enough? Is it a fun car? How does it behave on the street? What about the dual clutch transmission and so on? Okay, well, let me address a few of these things. I find the car is really planted. It feels way more planted than any Mustang I've ever driven. It really hugs the road, and a trip on a windy mountain road is exactly what this car is made for. The dual clutch transmission is bar none the single most efficient driveline that's out there today. It has lightning fast shifts, I mean virtually instantaneous shifts. And if you step on it with this car, I mean, it really takes off. I haven't dynoed the car, and I haven't, drag raced the car or anything like that. But my seat of the pantsometer says it's a really quick car. And in fact, that was an upside surprise. I assumed that it wouldn't feel as strong as like my Roush Mustang does. But it does. It feels fantastic. So as a driving experience, yeah, it's awesome. I highly recommend it. As far as fitting in the car is concerned, yeah, I'm a big guy. It is a little bit cramped. And I'm not going to lie to you, I have never messed around with a seating position as much in a car as I have with this Corvette. I've got a setup that I'm perfectly comfortable driving. It's actually really nice. I find it comfortable. I can drive for hours at a time. And the one thing that you've got to get through your head is that these cars are designed to be driven sort of laid back a little bit. If you're desperate to get yourself sitting up forward close to the wheel, it's not the car for you. It's slow, and it's meant for you to be kind of laid back a little bit. But there's a seating position like that that works fine. It feels comfortable, and that's the way you've got to set it up to drive it. Now, this car has the adjustable ride in it. Honestly, I didn't even test drive the car before I bought it, and I assumed that the ride would be kind of harsh. Sports cars are notorious for being harsh. I assumed that's the way this car was going to be. But in fact, if you leave it in touring mode, it's actually really compliant. It's a nice smooth ride. You can go on a long trip. You don't end up feeling like you've jarred your back or anything like that. It's really good. And if you turn the suspension up into sport or race mode, yes, it gets a little less compliant, but the car bites a little harder like that. And that's all configurable by you as the driver. So if you just need a drive around car or cruiser, yeah, the ride is shockingly smooth. Another kind of upside surprise on the car is the fuel economy. Honestly, I never even considered the fuel economy when I was buying the car. I assumed, it's a Chevy V8, it'll be good enough. Honestly, this car is the most fuel efficient vehicle that I own. And I own 9 vehicles, including a number of pretty modern ones. On the highway, say just cruising from Calgary up Highway 2 to Red Deer, which is a sort of a long, more or less flat stretch of what you might consider high elevation highway between 3,500 and 2,500 feet. This car gets about 29 miles to the US gallon regularly. My best recorded consecutive 50-mile fuel economy period was 35 miles to the US gallon. Really, it's like an economy car. Even in town, it does pretty good. It's really a shock to me how great the economy is. It's not the reason you buy a car like this, but it's a pretty nice surprise. Some other things I like, I know it's got the HVAC controls on a thing that sometimes guys refer to as the wall. Goes kind of down the middle of the car. I think it looks really cool, kind of like a fighter jet, but actually those controls are pretty intuitive. It's all auto climate and so on, so you don't have to mess around with stuff very much, but I kind of like the controls where they are. Now, that's going to be a personal preference. I know there's going to be guys comment on here and say, oh, they hate them or whatever, but I kind of like it, and I think they work just fine. It's an all glass cockpit car, so it's kind of got a wraparound screen. On the 24, that's actually an Android dash, so there's Android in behind. I use an iPhone. It works okay, but what it actually does is it squeezes the CarPlay screen down to a little bit of a subset of the dash and leaves some Android display around the edges. Some things about that are nice, like you can always see the outside temperature on there because that's part of the car's display, but it does make the CarPlay window a little bit smaller than it is in some other applications, like my Cadillac, for example, or it's a lot smaller than the big JVC display that I have in my 2011 Mustang. It seems like that dash works okay, but in some ways I wish that my CarPlay display was a little bit bigger. What about surprises, problems? I have a 2019 Escalade, and frankly, that unit is really good. Everything works the way it's supposed to. I kind of assumed that Chevy had solved a lot of their, funny controls and wiring and whatnot problems, and that this car was going to be just as good as the Cadillac. It isn't. Let's talk about the memory seats, for instance. It's got a function where the driver's seat recognizes your key fob, and when you get in the car, it adjusts itself to the driver's setting for that key fob, and it can adjust the steering column position as well. Then when you shut the car off and open the door, it's got an easy exit mode where you can program it to move the column and seat to a position that makes it easier to get out of. So for me, I set the easy exit to move the seat sort of back and up and move the column away from me, and it makes it just a little easier to get out of a car which is, low and requires a certain amount of dexterity to get into. When I get in the car, it only remembers the seating position maybe 1 out of 3 times. Most of the time I have to reach over to the door and press and hold the number 1 button on the door in order to get the seat in that position. It's not that it doesn't know what the driver position is, it's just that it doesn't automatically return to it most of the time. Sometimes it does, and it's very hard to figure out. It's just a flaky kind of Chevy problem. It's not the end of the world. Once you realize that it does it, you just press and hold the 1 on the door and it'll always go back to your seating position that way. But my Cadillac doesn't do that. When I get in, it remembers where I sit and it sets the seat and steering column up for that. When I get out, it moves it to the easy exit mode. It works every time. On the Corvette, like I said, it probably works about 1 out of 3 times. Another thing I kind of don't like is there is very low cabin space in the car. If I have a passenger, there really isn't even a place for me to put my jacket. I've got to put the jacket in the frunk or in the trunk. Even my street rod has a place for me to put my jacket while I'm driving with a passenger and have the jacket in the cab. So that's a little bit annoying. I'm not really sure why it has to be so tight, but it is, and that's a little detail that, you know, you should know. It's just you throw your jacket on the passenger seat, it's all good. But if you got a passenger, yeah, invariably you're throwing your jacket in the frunk or the trunk because there's no real place for it. Another thing that's happened, I think about 4 times, is when I've gone to put the top up, it has grabbed on the left side, missed on the right side, and then started cinching it down. And it's enough to give you a heart attack because you're like going to bend the frame, crack something. That's bad news when that happens. So far, nothing negative has happened from it pulling this. And it's been a real puzzle to me why it does this. But I've started to come to the conclusion that what happens is if you drive the car around with the top down, which I do most of the time, and you go on a long trip, so you're putting lots of heat onto that top and onto that mechanism, and you park somewhere and leave it like that for 15 minutes or something, you can really cook that mechanism. Then when you go to put it up, something's warped, heat warped, and that's why it misses. Almost all the time it works fine, but occasionally it misses on the right. I can't see an alignment issue there. I'm pretty sure it's a heat problem. Doesn't seem to do it if you just drive it for quite a while, then you go and put the top up right away, presumably because there's lots of airflow. But if you stop and just let it sort of cook, that's when the problem seems like it happens. You know, on the Mustang, when you put the top up, the final latching is done manually by the user. I'd have probably been happier if the Corvette worked that way. It doesn't, and it also seems like when it starts to latch, nothing you can do is going to stop it. It's going to latch down on the one side, and just, you know, pressing the button the other way or whatever doesn't stop that. So that's a little bit of an upsetting problem. Talk about the luggage capacity. Well, all right, the car's got a trunk and it's got a frunk. I hear some story that you can put 2 sets of golf clubs in it. I don't think that's true. You can put 1 set of golf clubs in it for sure. Maybe if you got baby golf clubs or something, but I don't play golf, so I don't really care about that. What I do care about though is being able to, you know, go somewhere with the car for a week or 10 days and be able to take my wife along. You can get a regular carry-on bag in the frunk, and in the trunk you can either get a couple of regular carry-on bags, or you can get a regular carry-on bag, and then I bought actually a Wrangler roller duffel that fits in there, and that's enough so that you can go on a little trip for a week or 10 days. You do have to be judicious about packing, and whoever you're bringing with you, you have to make sure that they understand what fits in the bag is what they got. And there's no room for anything else. So, and there's no room to bring home a bunch of souvenirs and stuff like that. You know, it's got to fit in your bags. Is it enough? Yes. Do you have to be careful when you pack it? Yes. You have to really plan what you're doing when you pack it. Is it less than almost any other unit that I have driven? Yeah, except for my street rod. It's got less cargo capacity than the Corvette. There's enough cargo capacity that you and your wife can use it as a road trip car. You just have to be judicious about how you pack it. What about maintenance? So if you're going to drive a car all the time, you got to maintain it. Well, I'm not going to lie to you. This is a little bit more expensive car to maintain than a lot of them are. For starters, the engine oil is 040 supercar. So this isn't sort of available everywhere. You can't walk into Canadian Tire or Walmart and just buy it. Frankly, I don't think it's that easy to come up with even at a sort of a regular parts store. I bought some from a GM dealer here and it was really expensive, like $25 for a US quart, Canadian. So that's awfully high. Now, I did find you can buy that oil from Rock Auto. They'll even ship it up here to Canada. I thought maybe there'd be a problem shipping engine oil, but there wasn't, and it wasn't even that slow. I think I paid something like $11.25 Canadian for a US quart from those guys. That's probably the place to get your 040 supercar oil. The filter is not a big deal. And the oil change itself is also not that big of a deal. The car's a dry sump, so you got to have a little more time allocated to it. It takes a little while to get all the oil dripped out of the car. But there's actually cutaways in the paneling under the car for the filter and the oil drain plug. So you don't have to take anything off. You can get at the filter and the drain plug without touching anything else. It's not that big of a deal to do an engine oil change. And it's not that big of a deal to do it yourself. I tell you, I let GM do the first change on the car. It was a little bit of a painful experience, I thought, and a part of that is it drives me crazy turning a car like this over to some dealership monkey. You know that the guy who's going to change your oil at the dealership is one of the least qualified guys there, and you just never know what kind of foolish mistake they're going to make. Strip the drain plug, put the filter on too tight, and so on. So the second change I did myself, and I'll tell you, they had that filter on unbelievably tight. So yeah, it's better to do it yourself if you have the capability. If you've got a 4-post lift, it's no problem at all. If you've got a 2-post lift, you better get the lifting pucks for this car, and you better be careful about how you lift it. A little bit of a difference in terms of maintenance on this car versus your typical American V8 is the dual clutch transmission. So you got to change the fluid in that transmission every so often. Fairly long interval. I think it's something like 45,000 miles. You got to change the fluid. So it doesn't seem like that bad of a deal. The fluid isn't insanely expensive, and again, you can get it from Rock Auto. A bigger deal for the dual clutch transmission is the transmission filter. Now that transmission filter needs to be changed, I guess, about every 7,500 miles. At first, I thought it was just the first 7,500 miles to deal with the break-in, but in fact, it's got to be changed, I think, about every other oil change, assuming you do an oil change every, 3,500 miles or so. In order to get at the DCT filter, you've got to take an aluminum panel off from under the car. And I mean, for the life of me, I don't know why there's so many fasteners on it, but someone at GM must think that panel is structural or something. There's something like 30 fasteners you got to take off, and there are 4 different types of fasteners. Most of them are long E-Torx bolts that bolt the panel into the aluminum frame structure of the car. There are some hex-headed bolts in there that you got to take out. There's a couple little just screws that you got to take out, and there's some 10mm headed screws. Every one of those is a potential for disaster. And I mean, I've seen guys with cars like this, Ford GT supercars, for instance, where you had to take this panel off just to do an oil change, or you have to take it off for the dyno as well. And somebody's been in there, lost a bunch of the fasteners, cross-threaded them, replaced them with sheet metal screws. All of that kind of stuff is a potential for failure. So it's probably better to do it yourself and make sure it's done right. But it's a real pain. I mean, it takes a while to get these panels off. You need to be careful. You need to have, you know, a variety of tools, including an eTorx socket set. And it probably doesn't hurt to have either like an air ratchet or a electric ratchet, at least to take them out, and then probably to spin them back in. Otherwise, you're going to be there like all day taking this stuff apart. That makes the job a big job. And the DCT filter itself, I think my local parts supplier was 180 Canadian dollars for it. I think I bought it from Rock Auto for 145 Canadian dollars, something like that. The filter costs as much or more than the oil change on the engine. Because both of these are regular service components and you have to do them fairly often, I think you're going to find that the car is a little bit more costly to maintain than, you know, like a Coyote Mustang is or something like that. You're going to go through tires, especially if you have the Z51 or Z51 package and you got the Pilot Sport 4S's. They're not going to last all that long, and I don't know what they're going to cost, $400 or $500 a tire, maybe more, I don't know. That's not all that different if you have a fast car. Pretty well any sort of fast car that you have, you're going to have to, you know, replace tires a lot more often than you are on your, you know, run around grocery getter type of unit. Also, the windshield, I hate to think how much the windshield costs. Southern Alberta is really hard on windshields. I ended up with a rock chip on the black on here that I didn't see, and I actually got a crack in it. My friends over at Cal Alta managed to get that crack stopped so I could try and get a little more life out of the windshield. It's got all these sensors and stuff in it. I'm sure the windshield's ridiculously expensive if you don't have glass coverage, which nobody in Southern Alberta does. Yeah, you got that to worry about as well. If you live someplace where windshields last a long time, well, good for you. That's not something you'll have to worry about. But here, yeah, I don't know. I'm guessing this glass is like $1,000. Maybe it's more. I hate to even think about it. So the long and short of it is the maintenance is more. It's a little more involved, and it's a little bit more painful even if you do it yourself. The car is a lot more car than the kind of cars that have, you know, cheap maintenance plans on them, and I think it makes up for it. Would I recommend the car to you for an everyday car? Yeah, if you option it out more or less like this, nose lift, hardtop convertible, 2LT, I think that's enough for you to use the car as an everyday car and really just be able to go anywhere you want without worrying about it. Is it a fun car to use as an everyday car? Yeah, you bet it is. And driving a car like this is like a half-hour holiday, twice a day, every day going to work. It really takes your mind off things. It's a joy to drive. And, you know, if you're interested in one, yeah, I recommend it to you. Thanks for watching. If you like the content here, give me a like and subscribe. Come back. I'm always producing car content, lots of Mustang stuff, lots of Corvette stuff, lots of fast car stuff. We'll see you next time.